The bond between Mandy and me was not something that emerged overnight. It was forged over years of shared challenges and triumphs. Both of us came from humble beginnings, shaped by hardworking parents who instilled the values of dedication and resilience. Mandy grew up in a modest home in Kent, where her father ran a small construction business, and her mother worked as a school teacher. Her upbringing imbued her with a strong sense of responsibility and a practical outlook on life. On the other hand, I spent my childhood in Surrey, surrounded by the bustling energy of a growing suburb. My father, a commercial lawyer, was a pivotal figure in my life, his discipline and ambition shaping my perspective on success. My mother, ever the nurturing presence, supported our family quietly but firmly, ensuring that warmth and stability were constants in our home. The lessons from my parents laid the foundation for my eventual pursuit of project management, a field that required a blend of strategic thinking and emotional intelligence. Mandy and I first crossed paths at university, both of us pursuing degrees in business administration. While she excelled in strategy and long-term planning, I thrived in execution and problem-solving. Our complementary skills drew us together, and soon our professional partnership evolved into a personal one. The early days of our relationship were filled with long nights brainstorming business ideas and envisioning the life we wanted to build together. It was during one of these brainstorming sessions that the idea for Alpha Business Consultants, ABC, took root. With my father's guidance and financial support, we launched our firm, focusing on strategic planning and organizational change. Those first years were anything but easy, balancing client demands, managing our growing team, and navigating the complexities of a fledgling business tested our partnership. Yet through it all, Mandy and I leaned on each other, forging a bond that we believed was unshakable. Each year, my wife Mandy covers about 8,000 miles on the road, mostly for brief trips to meet with her clients. Our home, nestled just off Surrey's bustling M25 motorway, offers a peaceful retreat despite its proximity to the chaos of London's traffic. While it's a charming place to reside, even a short drive on the M25 can quickly become a time-consuming ordeal. To cope with the frustrating traffic jams on the M25, Mandy's trick is simple. A few snacks, a soft drink, and tuning into her favorite bubblegum pop station. She's especially fond of her vibrant orange Volkswagen Beetle convertible. It's the latest model, with a 2-liter engine, a slick audio system, a black soft top, and black leather seats. It's a fun little car, though Mandy often fills it with empty drink bottles, candy wrappers, and assorted clutter. It strikes me as amusing that she's driving a car built to hit speeds over 120 miles per hour, yet spends most of her time either stuck in traffic or creeping through some of the UK's most crowded routes. Her first car back in college was an old Volkswagen Beetle, and she always talks about the good memories she has of it. This was before we met, and she was living with her parents. I never asked, but I imagine those fond memories probably involve some intimate moments in the small confines of that Beetle. When Volkswagen brought back the Beetle a few years ago, Mandy couldn't stop mentioning how much she wanted one. So for her 50th birthday, I took the hint and bought her the top-of-the-line convertible. I also splurged on a personalized license plate with her initials and the word BUG on it, an absurd amount of money for a plate, but it made the car feel even more special. It became affectionately known as the Baby Bug. Even though she loves the car, Mandy didn't always keep track of the tire pressure or fluid levels in the Baby Bug, so I made sure to check those regularly. Some people are fine with a cluttered car, but I can't stand it. So I'd clean out empty cups, food wrappers, and other junk. I never mentioned it to her, and she probably didn't even notice. She never thanked me, but that was fine because I always found enough loose change in the car to grab a couple of beers at the pub later. It's not surprising that Mandy doesn't always keep track of things like loose change, considering both of us have decent incomes and a comfortable lifestyle. Mandy is a business consultant who helps companies devise strategies for growth. I'm a freelance project manager who specializes in change management. Most people call me Terry, even though my real name is Dave, not Terrence, but Mandy and everyone else calls me Terry. It's short for Terminator, a nickname I earned because my job often involves firing people during organizational changes. Mandy and I met at university while studying business administration. We hit it off so well that before we got married, we started our own company, Alpha Business Consultants Limited. We were young and a bit naive, but we got some valuable advice and financial help from my father, a well-respected commercial lawyer. Sadly, my father passed away a few years ago, not long after we launched the business. He had agreed to become a director of the company, which helped give us credibility when negotiating with potential clients. In exchange, we gave him some shares in the company, and he was always willing to share his legal expertise with us. In the early days, Mandy and I worked hard to build up the business by helping companies with strategic planning. But after a while, we realized our skills were a bit different. Mandy excels at helping businesses plan for the future, while my strength is solving problems when things go off track. Her expertise is in the what should happen, while mine is in dealing with the what happens when it doesn't. Mandy and my father both felt that alpha business consultants should focus more on strategy rather than execution. So we agreed that I would branch out and work independently as a consultant specializing in organizational change projects. Mandy continued running ABC, working solo. Our twin daughters, Linda and Lucy, both left home a few years ago to attend university. Back when they were younger, I converted a room on the ground floor of our house into an office for the business, complete with a sign on the door. It was a quiet space for either of us to work without interruption. Over time, it became Mandy's office because I spent most of my time working directly with clients, while she usually worked from home. Mandy had about 50 regular clients, and she charged fees as needed when they called for her consulting services. In contrast, I didn't always have a steady stream of work. I often got referred to projects and worked as an assistant for a large management consultancy firm. I typically only had one client at a time and would work with them over weeks or months, managing big projects like office relocations or corporate restructures. After finishing a project, I usually took some time off, sometimes for a few days, sometimes for weeks, before the next assignment came up. Not knowing what's next can be intimidating for many people, but I got used to it and even enjoyed the breaks, using the time to read more or improve my cooking skills. It also gave me a chance to take care of household maintenance that didn't require a professional, like cleaning Mandy's fish tank. She'd read somewhere that having a large aquarium filled with brightly colored fish could help with her thinking, so she insisted on having one. She liked the idea of it, but never kept up with the maintenance. To her, PH was just 2 random letters. So I ended up being the one to take care of the fish in the tank. I never minded being alone when Mandy was away on business trips, and she never complained when I was working away for a week on a project. In fact, I think our relationship benefited from these occasional separations, especially once the girls left home. I had hoped that with the house to ourselves, we'd be able to liven up our social life, maybe even take romantic weekends to places like Paris or Rome. But as the saying goes, people make plans, and the gods laugh. Things took a turn when Mandy came home one day with little Doug, a Shih Tzu, also known as a Chinese lion dog. Every time I see him, I think of the old joke about a zoo with only one animal, a dog, and it's a Shih Tzu. At first, I was a little annoyed that Mandy brought a dog into the house without consulting me. Little Doug was sweet enough, but I knew right away that I'd end up being the one to walk him and take care of him whenever Mandy was busy, or even when she wasn't. When she got him, little Doug was just a tiny puppy and needed house training. Guess who got that job? He wasn't called Little Doug just for his size. For a while, he marked his territory all over the place. Mandy absolutely adored him. He became her dog, sitting on her lap, getting petted endlessly while she watched TV, and even lounging next to her on the sofa. He would park himself on the chair next to her at the dinner table, and every morning he'd be snuggled up in our bed. I did my best to persuade Mandy that little Doug shouldn't be allowed to roam freely through the house, but she didn't seem to hear me. To maintain any semblance of privacy, I had to lock the bedroom door if I wanted a little peace and quiet. But even then, I had to remember to unlock it afterward. Otherwise, little Doug would start barking at me from behind the door, and Mandy would join in from inside, howling at me to stop. One Sunday afternoon, I was cleaning up when I noticed a receipt on the floor next to a plastic bag. It was from the Ainsley House Hotel, a large country hotel about 20 miles away. The hotel had a well-known restaurant, but its main business came from its spa and conference center, hosting seminars, weddings, and corporate events. The receipt didn't have much detail, but the amount seemed like the kind of bill you'd expect for lunch or dinner for 2 or 3 people. I figured Mandy had taken some clients there, so I decided not to throw it away in case she needed it later. I slipped it into my wallet to give back to her. After I cleaned up the snack wrappers and junk, I tied the bag and threw it out, then took the Beetle to the garage for gas and a quick checkup. The next day, Mandy was heading out for a business trip up north and wouldn't be back for a few days. I had a few days of downtime in between projects and was hoping to take her out for lunch at the Fox and Hounds pub, but she said she was too busy preparing for the trip. I was a little disappointed since Sundays had always been family days for us, and our daughters still carried on that tradition by calling us every Sunday. When I got back from the garage, I found Mandy in the living room, phone in hand, clearly in the middle of a long conversation with Lucy. I could hear the tail end of it and realized Lucy was going through another crisis. Linda was the calm one, always steady and laid back, while Lucy had a tendency to make things dramatic. When they had relationship problems, I tried to stay calm, offering support but not getting too involved. They both knew they could come to us for advice, but for the emotional stuff, like crying or gossiping, it was usually Mandy they turned to first. From what I overheard, Mandy was telling Lucy to let it go, move on, and not dwell on things. There are plenty of fish in the sea, she was saying, and advising Lucy to focus on her life before rushing into anything new. I had no idea what had happened between Lucy and her boyfriend, so I didn't know what kind of advice to offer. Personally, I always believed in the Latin saying festina lente. Hurry up slowly. It means you should take your time to think things through before acting. But I knew Lucy would have to make the decision herself, so I just asked Mandy to say hi to Lucy for me and went into the kitchen to prepare Sunday dinner. We usually had roast beef with Yorkshire puddings and fries on Sundays, and I found it relaxing to put it all together, especially with a good bottle of claret to wash it down. At dinner, Mandy wasn't in the mood to chat, but she did share what had been going on with Lucy and Linda. Linda was doing well in her relationship and acing her schoolwork, while Lucy's situation was more complicated. Her boyfriend had dumped her after catching her kissing someone else. I commented that maybe the boyfriend would come around if given some time, but I wasn't optimistic about any reconciliation if Lucy started looking for other options. Mandy, on the other hand, thought Lucy should just forget the whole relationship and look for fun elsewhere. After dinner, I took little Doug for his evening walk. Once I made sure the little black bag with his poop was tightly sealed, I tossed it in the trash can outside. Later, I settled in front of the TV while Mandy retreated to her office to work on a presentation for a client. I loaded the dishwasher and eventually went to bed, but I had a hard time falling asleep. I was aware that Mandy had stayed up later than me, but when I woke up in the morning, I was greeted not by my wife, but by little Doug's foul-smelling dog breath in my face. Nothing quite wakes you up like the stench of a Shih Tzu's morning breath. I quickly threw on some clothes, took little Doug out for his morning bathroom break, and then joined Mandy in the kitchen. Mornings were never our strong suit, and Mandy needed at least a couple of espressos before she could really function. We made small talk about the weather while we waited for the usual chaos of rush hour on the M25 to subside. After a brief kiss on the cheek, she petted little Doug and hopped into the Beetle, heading out for the day. It wasn't until after she left that I remembered the receipt in my wallet and decided to leave it on her desk when I got the chance. That's when I noticed the time on the receipt, 10:18 a.m. The amount seemed to match what you'd expect for a night's stay. But why? Why had she needed a hotel when she just left for a business trip north? I figured I'd ask her about it later, assuming there was an easy explanation. But with some free time on my hands, I decided to check my calendar to see where I was supposed to be that week. It turned out that I was out of town, but Mandy had planned to be away for a few nights. The receipt was from the morning after she left, so it seemed like she'd only made it 20 miles before booking a night at the Ainsley House Hotel. I found it odd. If it were a business event, there'd be no reason to get a hotel room. I could have driven her back home or even picked her up later. I sat in her office staring at the receipt. Nothing had seemed out of the ordinary lately, and we were still intimate regularly. So, why the hotel? Was this proof of something more? I had no reason to suspect she was seeing anyone else, but now I couldn't shake the idea that maybe I was missing something. Why would she need a hotel room when I was often gone for work? Could she be doing both, staying at a hotel and seeing someone else? Or was there a simple explanation I wasn't seeing? I grabbed my phone and called the hotel number printed on the receipt, hoping to find out what was really going on. A woman answered the phone, and I asked if she could put me through to Mrs. Amanda Carmichael. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, "but Mrs. Carmichael hasn't checked in yet." I felt a brief sense of relief, but then she added, "Check-in isn't until noon, and it's only 10:30 now. Would you like me to leave a message for her?" I thought about leaving a message like, "Your husband called to check up on you," but I realized that probably wouldn't get me any closer to the truth, so I politely declined and made myself another cup of coffee. I didn't want to overthink this, but I also didn't want to sit around waiting for an explanation that might never come. I decided I needed to do something. Instead of waiting for Mandy to explain, I would take action. Maybe there was a perfectly innocent explanation, or maybe there was more to it than I was seeing. Either way, I couldn't stay in the dark. After putting little Doug outside and making sure he had a spot in the garden, I drove to Ainsley House Hotel. It was nearly noon when I arrived, and the first thing I noticed was the little Beetle parked in the lot. So, Mandy had already checked in. I parked a few rows away and dialed her number. She picked up right away. "Hey Terry, how's it going?" Mandy asked. "I heard there was a major accident on the M25 and I wanted to make sure you're okay," I answered as calmly as I could. "Traffic's been a bit slow, but I didn't hear about any accident." "It's on the M25, you probably missed it," she said. "Oh, I'm just passing Watford. Thanks for checking in," I replied. "Okay, call me when you get there," Mandy said before hanging up. I hung up, feeling unsettled. Was she just trying to cover her tracks, or was this all just an innocent misunderstanding? I decided to walk through the hotel and see if I could spot her. If I didn't find her in the public areas, I'd call her room directly and ask to meet her there. As I crossed the lobby, I noticed a bulletin board listing the events of the day. Monday was a quiet day for the hotel, except for one private event scheduled in the spa and fitness center at 7 p.m. I was curious. What kind of private party happens at a spa? Was it some kind of exclusive clothing-optional event? Maybe Mandy had gotten involved in something like that. I approached the receptionist to ask about the event, but she seemed caught off guard by the question and politely told me she couldn't provide any details. In other words, it was none of my business. I figured I might get more information elsewhere, so I wandered over to the lobby bar and ordered a coffee. When I casually asked the waiter about the private party at the spa, he leaned in and gave me a knowing look. "Yeah, you could say it's a group of nudists," he said. "But that's not all. It's actually a pretty well-known regular event here. It's hosted by the local club of couples who practice open relationships." I almost choked on my coffee. "Really?" I managed to say, though my stomach had already started to churn. "And what's the deal with it?" He shrugged. "If you want to know more, just look up Bottoms Up Club online. It's no secret around here." I stared at him for a moment, processing what he'd just told me. This wasn't the direction I expected to go in, but it was becoming clear that there was a lot I didn't know. As I sat there trying to wrap my head around the new information, I couldn't help but wonder, was Mandy really involved in something like this, or was I jumping to conclusions? I took a quick gulp of my coffee, pulled out my phone, and connected to the hotel's Wi-Fi. Finding the Bottoms Up Club was straightforward. Their website revealed that membership was £20 annually, and to attend their events, you needed to sign up and agree to the club's terms. The Mellow Monday Mix and Pick event, priced at £49 for single men, was hosted at the spa of a nearby hotel, starting at 7 p.m. The site also detailed the dress code, which included optional masks. By now, I was almost certain Mandy was at the hotel for this event. She seemed like the type to enjoy herself in that kind of setting, so I decided to find out exactly what was going on. As much as I didn't want to see my wife with strangers, I needed undeniable proof of her actions, whether it was for a divorce or simply for my own peace of mind. I knew sitting in the lobby waiting for her to reveal herself wasn't the best plan, so I finished my coffee and headed out. I dialed the club's number and spoke to another pleasant woman who walked me through the event details. She confirmed that I'd need to bring an ID to get in, reassured me my personal information would be kept private, and mentioned I could buy rubbers and masks on site. The club's name wouldn't appear on any transaction records, only SJB services. When I got home, I checked in on little Doug before changing into something more fitting for the evening. I still wasn't completely sure what I was dealing with, so I took a moment to review our finances online. Sure enough, payments to SJB services had been made over the past year. They seemed to line up with Mandy's memberships and events she'd attended. I printed out the bank statements for later reference. Later that evening, I returned to the hotel, arriving around 8 p.m., and made my way to the spa. At the reception, an attractive middle-aged woman in a floral dress greeted me. She was the same person I'd spoken with earlier. After checking my ID, she sold me a mask and some rubbers. Though I had no intention of using them, I needed to play along. She seemed to notice my nervousness and tried to put me at ease. "Just head to the gym," she said. "You're a bit late, so you might have to wait, but everyone's really friendly. If you need anything, just ask. You'll fit right in." I put on the mask and walked through the door into the gym area. The room was dimly lit with the heating cranked up to create a more intimate atmosphere. Soft jazz played in the background, the volume low enough to keep conversations flowing without being disruptive. The space was filled with about 70 or 80 people, some fully dressed, others half-dressed or completely without clothes. I spotted a table with refreshments near the entrance, but the real action seemed to be happening around the mats scattered across the room. There were 8 large white sheets laid out, each surrounded by groups of people, couples, singles, and groups, some masked, some not. I felt out of place in my full attire, but I needed to stay that way if I was going to get the evidence I needed. I moved closer to one group, watching as 2 young women explored each other's bodies. The crowd around them murmured approval. In the next group, 2 older couples, their flesh jiggling as they fumbled with each other, gave off the impression of a bizarre, awkward wrestling match. Then I saw her, Mandy. She was in the far corner, on a mat, unclothed and entangled with 2 young men. Her face was unmistakable, even without a mask. I could spot the small turtle tattoo on her left ankle from across the room. She was in the middle of it, and the group around her seemed to be egging her on. I wasn't going to confront her. I didn't want to give myself away, so I stayed quiet and focused on recording everything. I had signed a confidentiality agreement to get in, but that wasn't going to stop me from getting the proof I needed. Mandy's face was visible enough that I could blur out the others later in the video. A man in a black shirt, standing next to me, muttered under his breath. "This is like watching a door get kicked in during a storm," he commented, gesturing toward Mandy. "Look at how she's moving." A woman nearby, who seemed to know a bit too much, added, "She's great with a few guys at once. We've been with her a couple of times." My stomach twisted, but I pushed the feeling aside. My focus remained sharp, capturing what was happening on my phone without drawing attention. I knew I had the proof, both in video and through the casual comments surrounding Mandy. I'd seen enough. I couldn't stay any longer, and I wasn't about to watch this unfold any further. The woman at the reception was surprised to see me leaving so soon, but I made up a quick excuse. I had forgotten something, I said, and promised I'd be back. As I left, my mind was racing. What I had just witnessed was enough to shatter everything. Mandy, the woman I trusted, was involved in something completely foreign to me. The part of me that was still holding on to some hope tried to rationalize it, but I knew what I had seen. I knew what she was doing. Our once special bond felt completely worthless now. I was still in shock, but as I drove away from the hotel, my body and mind began to process what I had just witnessed. A wave of nausea hit me. My stomach felt hollow, and bile crept up my throat as if I were experiencing food poisoning. Along with that, an overwhelming sadness gripped me, so deep that I had to sit in the car for a few minutes before I could even think about heading home. As time passed, I started to build a mental wall around my grief and anger. It wasn't any easier just because I understood how to handle such emotional shifts. I wasn't going to deny reality. I'd seen it with my own eyes. She had slept with other people. Anger surged, but I accepted that I needed to deal with the inevitable changes that lay ahead. Grief and anger would be my constant companions for a while, but I knew I had to act. I wasn't about to waste time stuck in confusion over cause and effect. By the time I got back home, I'd already started planning my next steps. I couldn't control what had happened, but I could control how I responded to it. I would face the changes head on, and I wasn't going to let them overwhelm me. I would take charge, not just be dragged along by circumstances. I wanted to be proactive, not passive. That night, I took little Doug for a quick walk before attempting to numb the pain with a couple of drinks. I didn't sleep well and woke up feeling awful the next day, but I had to keep moving. Little Doug and I were headed to Cornwall. I'd always thought of it as the toe of England, the furthest point southwest, staring out at the vast Atlantic. These days, much of Cornwall had turned into a quiet haven for wealthy retirees who'd bought up the cottages once owned by local fishermen. The fishermen were long gone, replaced by elderly couples like Mr. and Mrs. Beej, who spent their days walking their dogs and enjoying the countryside. I considered taking little Doug to Belgium, but without a chip and a pet passport, it wasn't an option. For once, I was glad he didn't have a microchip. He couldn't be tracked. And in the end, Cornwall was a lot farther than Brussels anyway. The drive to Newquay took over 5 hours, with a brief stop to let little Doug stretch his legs. I dropped him off at the animal shelter there, telling the receptionist I'd found him wandering the streets of Newquay. She quickly recognized him as a Shih Tzu and assured me he'd find a home easily, especially with his cute size. I left, relieved that he didn't seem upset or whiny, just a little confused as we said our goodbyes. Afterward, I decided to find a quiet pub. The man behind the counter at a gas station recommended the White Horse. It took me a moment to realize he meant the nearby White Horse Hotel. I ended up sitting at a corner table with a plowman's lunch and a pint of good ale. While eating, I checked my phone and called Jim Savage, a senior partner at a management consultancy in Surrey. Jim and I had known each other for years. He'd been a rival since Mandy and I started our business, ABC. Jim was a charming guy, but a bit of a wolf in sheep's clothing. When we first started ABC, he'd offered us a cushy job to close down our business and come work for him, knowing full well that he'd probably let us go when it suited him. We'd always turned him down, but we'd kept in touch, meeting from time to time at business events. Jim always seemed to be genuinely interested in what I had to say, even though I knew it was part of his strategy to neutralize us. Despite the urgency of my situation, Jim agreed to meet the next day. When I finally got home to Surrey that evening, I was exhausted. I planned to call Mandy to tell her about little Doug, but before I could dial, my phone rang. "Hi, Mandy," I answered. "I was just about to call you." "I have bad news," I continued. "Little Doug somehow got out of the garden and was hit by a truck. I'm so sorry." There was a long pause on the other end before she gasped. "What? Is he okay?" I kept my voice steady. "I'm afraid he's gone. A passerby saw him slip under the gate and run into the road, but the truck driver didn't stop. The truck run over him and there was nothing I could do. I buried him in the garden." Mandy sobbed uncontrollably on the phone, muttering about how devastated she was. I couldn't help but feel a dark satisfaction. Honestly, there was a part of me that considered the idea of liquidating little Doug myself, but that seemed too far. After all, he wasn't some wild animal. He was a dog. What really gave me peace was the fact that little Doug wasn't dead at all. He was safe and sound in Cornwall, far from Mandy's knowledge. I expressed my condolences, suggesting I could buy a small headstone for his grave. That pushed Mandy into another round of tears. And we ended the call. She was clearly heartbroken, and I knew she would cry for hours, mourning the loss of her beloved little dog. As I sat back, I felt a bitter sense of relief. At least I had some control over this situation. My meeting with Jim Savage went smoothly. After I outlined what I needed, he seemed confident that his company would accept the terms I proposed. He assured me they'd have a corporate lawyer draft an agreement for my review as soon as possible. On my way home, I stopped by a local real estate office to get an estimate of our house's market value. The figure they gave me was quite impressive, far more than I had expected. Mandy and I had talked about our retirement plans before, and we had agreed to keep the house and rent it out. We'd even run it by our daughters, and they were on board as long as we didn't sell. But now, with everything that had happened, I realized I'd need to change my approach. I didn't bother calling Mandy that night, even though I knew she'd likely be waiting for an update on how she was handling little Doug's end. I had thought about it, but I wasn't in the mood to be sympathetic. She could deal with it herself, and I figured she'd be back the next day. She said she was near Manchester, but who really knows? I didn't care where she was. What mattered was that, for the first time in a while, I slept a little better that night. Perhaps it was petty, but I felt a strange sense of satisfaction from this situation. The next morning, I briefly wondered where little Doug had gone, but then it hit me. He was gone. I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. I didn't have to feed him, walk him, or pick up after him anymore. That fleeting sense of relief, however, was quickly replaced by the realization that I had much bigger problems to handle. In England, divorce lawyers are called family solicitors, and they tend to specialize in divorce and other family-related issues. There are plenty of them to choose from, and honestly, they all seemed pretty similar. I didn't need a local one, so I set up an appointment with a family solicitor in Dorking. The name amused me, and the town wasn't far from where I was. I had time to liquidate before the meeting, so I spent the afternoon browsing personalized license plates online, visiting a jewelry store, and picking up some groceries. I also took a few calls from business associates. By the time I got to the law office, I was feeling a bit frazzled. Never in a million years did I think I'd be sitting in a solicitor's office discussing divorce. The secretary, noticing my tension, offered me coffee and tried to calm me down while I waited. The solicitor who saw me was another middle-aged woman. She listened intently to my story, but also advised me not to rush things. For a second, I wondered if she was trying to delay the process to earn more fees. But then I dismissed the thought. In my experience, lawyers are rarely in a hurry to wrap things up. They prefer to keep the billable hours flowing. I mentioned to her that the divorce petition could always be withdrawn later if necessary, although I had no intention of doing that. We discussed my options, and in the end, we decided to proceed with filing for divorce based on Mandy's infidelity. When Mandy came home that evening, I'd already decided I wasn't going to cook for her. I made a spicy beef curry, one of my favorites, that I knew she'd hate. It worked out perfectly for me. I also used the opportunity to crack open some of my favorite Scottish craft beer. Over dinner, I casually mentioned the new contract I'd secured while she was away. I told her I'd be working in Yorkshire for a while, but she didn't seem to care much. She was still upset about little Doug, and when I told her I'd be leaving for Yorkshire the next morning and wouldn't be back until late Saturday night, she seemed disappointed. I didn't want to seem completely heartless, so after dinner I hugged her, and we sat down to watch TV together. She cried quietly over little Doug, and I sat beside her, my beer breath mingling with the curry fumes. My time in Yorkshire turned out to be very productive. The deal had already been finalized over the phone, and all the paperwork was ready for signing. I knew several of the directors involved, and they were thrilled to have me accept the initial 6-month assignment with the possibility of a permanent position. They also agreed to cover the cost of my move, temporary accommodation for 2 weeks, and half the rental costs for a place in Yorkshire. Everything was arranged so I could start immediately. Now, it was time to distance myself from Mandy even further. After checking into my hotel that evening, I was looking forward to a pint or two of local ale. I didn't want to waste time on the phone with Mandy, but she rang anyway. She had discovered that the fish in our tank had died earlier in the afternoon, and she was trying to break the news to me as gently as possible. She had no idea I was the one who stopped feeding them. I had simply stopped caring. "I'm so sorry, especially after everything with little Doug," she said. "I tried to do what I could, but I couldn't save them." "I'm sure it's too late now, Mandy," I replied. "Just leave the tank. I'll clean it when I get back tomorrow." Saturday was a brief stopover at home. I had returned early in the morning, but I planned to leave for Yorkshire again on Sunday. I had a long list of things to do, including sorting through paperwork, while Mandy went shopping and made dinner. It kept her distracted. We spent a quiet evening in front of the TV with a couple of glasses of wine. Neither of us was in the mood for closeness. We were both exhausted. To my surprise, I slept deeply that night. When I woke up, the shock that had been hanging over me seemed to have eased. I felt like my mind had adjusted to the new reality. The feelings of alienation and despair were beginning to fade, replaced by a quiet resolve to push through and focus on what I could control. Although I still felt a deep emptiness inside, I knew I wasn't lost in grief. I had regained control by focusing on the immediate tasks in front of me. After lunch, I packed up my car, kissed Mandy goodbye, and drove off to Yorkshire. A few days later, when she was served with the divorce papers, she had no idea it was coming. I knew exactly when it would happen, and I made sure my phone was off that day. It wasn't that I was trying to be cruel. It was just that I was busy. Still, there was a part of me that felt a sense of satisfaction in knowing I had a few hours of peace without her calls. After work, I returned to my hotel room, turned my phone back on, and checked the messages and voicemail. The main theme was clear. She was upset, confused, and angry. Without hesitating, I called her back. "What the hell is going on, Terry?" she asked, cutting right to the chase. "That's exactly what I've been asking myself, Mandy," I replied. "But this all started about a week ago." "I don't understand what you're doing, but it needs to stop. This has gone way beyond a joke," she said. "It's almost like you're reading from my script, Mandy," I answered. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, confused. "Well, at some point I started wondering what was going on with you," I told her. "But now it's too late to stop, and this has definitely gone beyond a joke." "Are you talking about Ainsley House Hotel and the Bottoms Up Club?" she asked, her voice shaking. There was a long pause, followed by a heavy sigh. "I'm sorry, Terry," she said. "I really don't know what to say. I never thought you'd find out." "Well, Mandy, what you don't know can't hurt you, right?" I said. "Well, now I know," she replied. "I know, and it hurts," I said. "We need to talk about this, but it's something we can't do over the phone. Will you come home on Friday?" she asked. "I don't think talking will help much," I replied. "I'll be home Saturday, but I need to be back in Yorkshire by Sunday evening." When I returned Saturday afternoon, Mandy looked nervous. I didn't unpack my things. I wasn't sure how things would go. I planned to sleep in one of the guest rooms, keeping an option to leave if things became too tense. In situations like this, Brits tend to brew some tea and hope things will settle down. Soon enough, Mandy sat me down in the living room with a cup of tea, and I waited for her to speak. "First of all, I have to admit that this whole mess is my fault," she began. "Terry?" I didn't say anything. "The truth is, I gave in to temptation. I stumbled across the Bottoms Up Club by accident, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. You weren't home when I first went, and I was really nervous. I even wore a masquerade mask because I thought no one would recognize me. I thought I could just observe, watch people perform, and see the show." I let her keep talking. "At first, it was just as I imagined," she continued. "But then people started approaching me and I couldn't resist. It didn't take long before I joined in. It was scary at first, but after the first time, I realized that these people were some of the most genuine, kind, and safe people I'd ever met. That's another reason I kept going back. I started to enjoy it. I like watching others have sex, and I like being watched when I'm having sex. Part of it is that sex with other people can just be fun. It doesn't have to mean anything serious." She looked at me, waiting for my reaction. "I agree, Mandy," I said after a pause. "Sex with other people can be fun." She smiled, clearly relieved. "As far as I'm concerned," I added, "as long as everyone's consenting, you can do whatever you want. No one should judge that." I sipped my tea as her smile quickly faded. I wanted to see how she would take it. She seemed to expect my response. She had a plan, and she was going to see it through. She admitted she made a mistake, but didn't seem to feel any regret or show any real remorse. It was clear to me that she wasn't planning to stop. "What I did with other men didn't change how I feel about you, Terry," she said. "I love you, and our life together is amazing. I just hope you can understand that having fun with other men in a safe space doesn't threaten what we have. If you're not into it, just ignore it. If you're not around, you won't even know." "I think you're mistaken, Mandy," I said. "And honestly, I've already seen more than enough to ignore." "What do you mean by that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I know about the payments to the hotel and the club," I said flatly. "Are you saying you saw me there?" she asked, almost incredulous. I locked eyes with her. "A couple of weeks ago, I saw you at the club around 8 p.m. You were with two young guys. Some people mentioned that you enjoy having sex in public." "Oh my God," she gasped, horrified. "I'm so sorry. I can't believe you saw me. I didn't think you'd ever find out. But please, understand it was always just physical. It was an exciting adventure for me. That's all it ever was. I don't love anyone else, and I never wanted to. Looking back, I should have talked to you about it, but I wasn't sure how to tell you." "Well, Mandy, you're right about that," I said, my voice cold. "I wouldn't have been happy if you'd told me. Maybe it was more exciting for you because you were hiding it from me." "I know you're hurt, and I understand why," she said, her voice soft. "But Terry, don't you think filing for divorce is a bit extreme?" "I don't think it's extreme, not with everything you've done," I replied. "You decided to betray me. You chose to give yourself to others, and I can't accept that. I want a divorce." Her shoulders slumped as she sighed deeply. "Can we at least think about what this will mean for everyone before we take this step? I just think we shouldn't rush into it without considering the consequences." "I'm already thinking about the consequences," I said. "We can take some time to think it through, but I don't expect my mind to change." I left Mandy to process things on her own and made my way to the Fox and Hounds for a drink. I've always had a soft spot for pubs, but there was something about this one that never quite felt right. Despite living in the area for years, I wasn't going to miss it. The regulars were a mix of pretentious, middle-aged professionals who made me feel like I didn't belong. If I had the option, I'd take a pint of Yorkshire ale over any watery southern beer. I sipped on my tepid, lackluster pint and started thinking through my next move. When I returned, Mandy had already started getting dinner ready. I didn't bother unpacking. Instead, I dropped my bag in the guest room and grabbed a few things I needed from the master bedroom. Dinner conversation revolved around our daughters. Apparently, Lucy had taken Mandy's advice and was now actively looking for someone to replace her ex-boyfriend, who, to Lucy's frustration, had moved on with her best friend. I had no idea what a BFF was, so I asked, and Mandy explained it was short for best friend forever. I had my doubts about how long that friendship would last. "I always thought of you as my best friend," I said. Mandy could tell I was distant, though I wasn't being rude about it. I don't think she fully realized just how much had shifted between us. Maybe she assumed that our earlier conversation had somehow worked out a truce. I wasn't about to correct her. Sunday morning came, and I was up early. I made some toast and coffee, packed my bags, and headed out to Yorkshire. Before leaving, I double-checked the car to make sure I hadn't left anything belonging to Mandy, including a few business files I found tucked in the back seat. I just passed Watford when my phone rang. "Where are you?" Mandy asked. "Did you take the Beetle to the garage?" "No," I replied. "I grabbed the little bug and am heading back to Yorkshire." "I don't get it," she said. "Why didn't you say goodbye? And why take the little bug?" "I just felt like it," I answered. "You were still asleep." There was a pause as she processed what I'd said. "I don't understand," she finally said. "What am I supposed to do without the Beetle?" "You've got other cars," I said. "Well, the one I usually drive." "I'm sure you'll manage," I replied. "Just be careful and don't mess up the bug." By the next day, I had bought a red Mazda MX-5 convertible from a dealership in Yorkshire, using the Beetle as a partial trade-in, but keeping the personalized plates. I had all the paperwork sorted and even posted an ad for the plates online. Mandy wasn't happy when she found out. A week later, she called furious. "How am I supposed to get my car back?" she demanded. "I sold it," I told her flatly. "What do you mean you sold it?" she shouted. "That's my car." "Actually," I said, "it's mine. My name's on the registration." "This isn't fair, Terry." "Maybe not," I replied, "but you could say I gave it to you. And taking it back? Not much different from what you did to me." "Don't be petty, Terry," she snapped. "It's not the same. You're being ridiculous. But fine, I understand what you mean. If you stop this nonsense and come home, we can work things out." I didn't respond right away. "I'll come back to you when I'm ready," I said. For the next week, Mandy called me every day, asking me to come back to Surrey to talk and sort things out. The conversation was always the same, until the day she found out I had sold my shares in ABC. "How could you make such a decision on your own?" she screamed. "I'm the second shareholder. You should have consulted me." "Fair questions," I replied calmly. "I get that you're angry, and I know my decision affects you. But I didn't need to ask you about selling my shares, just like you didn't ask me before you decided to sleep with other men. I get why you're upset, but what's done is done. You'll have to accept it." "You're a fool," she muttered. A few days later, she called me again, absolutely livid. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. When we started the company, we each owned 50% of the shares. What she didn't know was that I had inherited my father's shares, which brought my stake to 51%. That was when the company's new majority owners froze our accounts and started moving forward with a takeover. Mandy called, furious and panicking. "Do you realize what you've done? ABC had over 200,000 in the bank. Now we've lost control of it. You've ruined our future." "Sorry, Mandy," I said, cutting her off, "but at least you still have your job." There was a sharp intake of breath, followed by silence. Then I heard her sobbing uncontrollably before the call cut off. I think she eventually figured out that the deal I made with Jim Savage was about more than just the money. In exchange for 51% of the shares, I got twice the average turnover from the past 5 years, plus the equivalent of the company's cash reserves. Jim also offered to keep Mandy on as a consultant for at least 2 more years, with a decent salary and performance-based bonuses. Jim wasn't an idiot. He knew it was a smart move to keep Mandy as the face of ABC, even if our personal lives were falling apart. During the divorce, the sale of our home became a major complication. In England, the process of buying and selling property is far from straightforward. Transactions are often linked in a chain, meaning one sale depends on others being finalized first. The highest bid is rarely the final one either. Sometimes, a new buyer swoops in with a higher offer just after the official closing date. That's exactly what happened to us. Our top bid was contingent on other deals, and while it seemed promising, a better, unconditional offer came in the very next day. Accepting that offer was a relief for both of us, and I think Mandy was glad to see the sale go through without further delays. At this point, Mandy had fully come to terms with the fact that our marriage was over. The property was transferred to a company called Max Payne Associates, though I made sure that the real buyer's identity remained a mystery. I considered it a smart investment. The house was in a great location, and I planned to rent it out to generate passive income. Now, living and working in Yorkshire as a management consultant, I hadn't spoken to Mandy in a while until she called, asking if I had seen her wedding dress. Our daughter Linda and her fiancé were about to tie the knot, and Mandy hoped Linda would wear the same dress she had worn years ago. She was convinced it had somehow been packed in with my things when we separated. "Sorry, Mandy," I said. I don't have a clue where it is. I always try to be honest. Actually, I took the dress and sold it to a woman in Yorkshire who has a boutique. I wouldn't let my wife keep it after everything, and I sure wasn't going to let one of our daughters wear it. That dress is a reminder of a marriage that's over, and I wasn't going to let any of them walk down the aisle in it. A few days later, Lucy called me, sounding frantic. "Mom's going crazy, Dad," she said. "She found out that the diamond ring you gave her is fake. She thought it was worth a fortune, and now she's devastated." "Oh, that's awful," I replied flatly. I bet she never would have known if she hadn't looked. People put so much value on things, and then it hits them hard when they realize those things aren't what they thought. Lucy wasn't done. "Well, the real ring is locked up in a safety deposit box at my bank. Who knows? It might come in handy if I ever find someone special." As I settled into my new life in Yorkshire, I often reflected on how much had changed. The days of planning with Mandy, dreaming of a shared future, seemed like distant memories. Those days had been full of hope and ambition. Two young idealists ready to take on the world, but life has a way of peeling back the layers of romance to reveal the complicated mess beneath. In many ways, my time in Yorkshire was therapeutic. The open skies and brisk countryside air felt like a reset button on my soul. My consulting work kept me busy, and with each project I felt a bit more like myself again. There was something deeply satisfying about solving problems for clients and seeing tangible results. It was the kind of fulfillment that my personal life had long ceased to provide. I still thought about Mandy, though less frequently and with fewer pangs of bitterness. Occasionally, I'd catch myself smiling at a memory from our early years together, the way she used to playfully tease me about my love for Yorkshire puddings or how she'd light up a room with her laugh. But those memories were like faint stars on a cloudy night, eclipsed by the weight of betrayal and the inevitable unraveling of our marriage. One Friday evening, I found myself at a local pub, nursing a pint of ale and watching a game on the telly. The pub was alive with chatter, the hum of conversations creating a comforting backdrop. As I sipped my drink, I overheard a couple of blokes at the next table debating the best way to deal with life's disappointments. One of them, an older man with a weathered face, summed it up simply, "You've got to let go of what weighs you down, mate, otherwise it'll drown you." His words stuck with me. Letting go had never been my strong suit. I was a planner, a fixer, someone who thrived on control. But life with Mandy had taught me that some things were beyond my ability to repair. Back at my flat that night, I decided to clear out the last remnants of my old life. There was a box of photographs, letters, and other mementos tucked away in a closet. As I sorted through them, I came across a picture of Mandy and me from our university days. We were at the beach, grinning like fools, arms wrapped around each other. I couldn't help but laugh at how young and clueless we looked. I slipped the photo into a drawer, deciding it deserved a place in my life, not as a reminder of what was lost, but as a testament to what once was. As for Mandy, I heard through the grapevine that she was still running ABC, though with a significantly reduced workload. Our daughters stayed in touch with both of us, and while Lucy occasionally dropped hints about Mandy's latest escapades, I didn't pry. I had my life to live, and she had hers. In the end, I realized that the best way to move forward was to focus on the road ahead rather than the one behind. Life doesn't come with a map, and sometimes the best you can do is put one foot in front of the other, trusting that the journey will lead you somewhere worth being.